So I'm going to share some slides, and if you have any questions or anything, if you can sort of drop them in the chat or make a quick note. I also advise, if you have a pen and paper to hand, that you have that close by, because I'd like to take us through a couple of exercises during the time that we have. So what I'd like to cover, just the main points, are the types and effects of loss, grief stages or grief processing, adapting solution-focused approaches to help people, and then we've got time, hopefully, at the end for a bit of question and answer. So I've put up this quote from what's thought of as the godmother of grief counselling, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. When we think of loss, we think of the loss through death of people we love, but loss is far more encompassing theme in our life, for we lose not only through death, but also by leaving and being left, by changing and letting go and moving on. Our losses include not only our separations and departures from those we love, but our conscious and unconscious losses of romantic dreams, impossible expectations, illusions of freedom and power, illusions of safety, and the loss of our own younger self, the self that thought it would always be unwrinkled and invulnerable and immortal. These losses are part of life, universal and unavoidable, inexorable. And these losses are necessary because we grow by losing and leaving and letting. And I think that last sort of sentence really says why it's really important that if we're working with people, we need to engage with this topic in some way, because we're all about growth and change, and you can't have that without loss in any shape or form. And also the universal experience of it. Life is just multiple losses if you look at it in a negative way. And every change, no matter whether you're a management consultant or a coach or a hypnotherapist or just working with people or part of a family, you will come across this topic, and it's good to have one or two techniques to be able to support someone through it. And there's very little support really out there when you're looking for it, and very little research done into how the process is and how we can support people. There's even doubt whether help helps at all. So I'll move on to the symptoms and effects of grief. I don't know if you can think of any, if you want to just type them into the chat box, but in terms of social effects, the sorts of things, that symptoms that you see and effects of, and when I say grief, I'm being very broad about it. So it's loss of a person, or loss of a dream, or loss of something, like a career or a house or a relationship. If you have a think about that, the types of things that I've thought of are withdrawal and isolation, the pressure from societal expectations. There's always somebody who can tell you how long you should be feeling sad for and when you should stop, or what you should do about it, that you need to keep busy, or you need to not engage with, there's always opinions out there and a lot of social pressure. There's pressure to make decisions because of the urgency of administration and systems mean that people have to make decisions about things probably before they're really ready. Pressure to move on, to be strong, to return to work. And there's also the taboos and stigmas that can go alongside certain types of loss. I'm talking about things like suicide, AIDS, losses that people may not feel like they can talk about openly with people. Then there's the emotional side, which is probably a bit more obvious to people. Numbness and shock, anger, guilt, sadness, avoidance, relief sometimes, and sometimes guilt about being relieved, unpredictability, longing for the past, loneliness, insecurity. Physical, often people tend to neglect themselves a little bit. They lose appetite and they can't sleep, so they begin to not take care of themselves so much. Insomnia, loss of routine and social support will have an effect on their physical health, self-medicating, avoidance techniques, exhaustion, a weaker immune system. Interestingly, sometimes people who have lost someone close will begin to experience physical symptoms similar to maybe the person had when they were alive. The spiritual loss of faith, or search for meaning, dreams and visions, sometimes often seeing the person there as if they were still there, and the mental, which is denial, negative or distorted cognitions, which we'll talk about later, inability to concentrate, thoughts of self-harm even, or not wanting to go on living themselves, confusion and impaired decision making, which is why really it's quite bad that our system's set up that people have to make decisions before they can actually relax and make decisions with their full cognitive abilities. Those are some of the things which I've listed. In terms of models for grief, I've not included the one from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross because for years and years that she's the most well known, that there's five stages of grief: anger, denial, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. But it's recently people have gone back and read what she wrote properly, and it's been discovered that she was more of an expert and talking about near-death experience. So she's not talking about the people who are left behind, but more about the person going through knowing that they're about to die. And it's slightly different. So I've put in some other ones that might be useful when you're working with clients. This one is a really nice one that I use a lot with clients. It's called the whirlpool of grief. And it's basically pictured as a metaphor. As you see at the top, the person is rowing along quite happily on the river of life, but facing behind the person is the drop of the thing that happens to them in terms of loss, which is the waterfall. They go through shock and numbness and denial. And then there's the whirlpool at the bottom where they're trying to make sense of everything and cope with everything, going round and round. Some people stay in that whirlpool for quite a long time. Other people fall out on the shore where and feel a bit washed up for a bit. Other people end up on the rocks in pain with physical symptoms. And then you can see after the whirlpool, the river calms down and moves on. So I like using this with clients, first of all asking them where they feel like they might be on that picture, and then that can open up a discussion about how they're feeling and maybe some of their needs. It also, what I like about it is that it shows that things move on. So it gives the sort of hope that after the whirlpool there is actually more river. So it's part of a continuity of life. You don't end up stuck on a rock or in the whirlpool forever. It's a very personal experience, grief, and people take as long as they take. Some people will recover fairly quickly. Other people will stay in the whirlpool for a very long time before they can feel like they're ready to move on. At the bottom, there is just an explanation of the difference between the words that we use. So bereavement is what happens to you, grief is what you feel, and mourning is what you do. This model I don't really use much because it's like a step model again that almost implies that people move through a process, and if they're not on a certain stage, then there's something wrong. It can be useful as a template for you to coach. So it's the model of grief from Worden, and it starts with truth, accepting reality, experiencing the pain of loss, adjusting to a new life without the person or the ex thing, reinvesting in a new reality. This model is again quite useful to share with clients, and I find it a bit more realistic. It's an interesting model. It's called the dual process, and what it's trying to say is that there's two sides going on in the person at the same time. There's the loss oriented, where they're looking back, and there's all the things that go with feeling the loss. But there's also the restoration oriented side, where they're trying to cope with a new life without, and doing new things and distracting from grief. And you can see the wiggly line in between. It's not straightforward. It's quite like, people have described it like waves. Grief comes in waves and unexpected, it's unpredictable. So people will bucket sort of from loss oriented to restoration oriented for quite a while, whilst they try and adjust. And this is useful because it helps clients realize that that's normal, that they will feel like they're recovering and then suddenly something will happen that triggers them back into, you know, that wave of grief again. However, this is my favorite model. It's from Tonkin, who is a grief counsellor in 1996. She created it after talking to lots of clients who said that they started off sort of on the side where it's all a big grey circle, so that the grief almost encompassed their entire self. But then slowly it then becomes, it never goes away, but it's just part of their life, and it's called Growing Around Grief. And Cruz, the bereavement charity, adapted it a bit later on to be even better, because people said that actually the amount of grief stays the same. It's just that their life grows bigger, the other things around them grow bigger over time. They made this model looking at plants growing, where the grief is the same size throughout and always stays with the person, but the rest of their life, like a tree growing around a rock, the rock's still there, but it's not stopping the growth or the moving forwards. So these are some of the key things that really help someone to healthily process grief. When you look at them, you can start to think of ways that you might be able to help clients, yourself, or in order to deal with what's happened to them. The first is realism and the ability to openly express their people's feelings. So it's really important, if feelings are repressed and they're not able to be expressed, it's been shown that a person's more likely to get stuck and not be able to re-engage with life. Thinking about, sometimes there isn't anyone else that people can talk to, because sometimes there's all these expectations around. They have to be strong for the rest of their family. They're supposed to go back to work and not feel things. They have to arrange funerals or get on with a new career, or, you know, things like that. Everything's pushing people to move on quickly. Sometimes emotions aren't expressed and they're just suppressed and stay within. Relationships are really important, both the relationship to, I've put the focus of loss, but it could be a person or it could be the thing that you feel you've lost. The relationship to that needs to be maintained in some way. The person needs to know that it's not just a cut off, that if it's a person, that person still stays with you as you go forward in life. The memories and the good things and the qualities and the experience will always be with you. So that helps a person begin to think that they could move forwards. Also the relationship with others, so social network. I put positive social network because there's a lot of negative social network that can also have an influence on the ability to process grief healthily. I openly said before, there's people who've got opinions and advice and think they know what's best for you when you're in a position that you're grieving, and sometimes it needs the coach or therapist to help you be able to say no, be assertive, and protect yourself a bit when you're vulnerable. Sense of control, which has been shown to be especially important if someone's facing chronic illness or disability and it's the loss of health. A balanced sense of agency and communion. So that's about locus of control again. So if someone feels that they know where they can take control and where they need the help of others, and that's a balance. Physical care, taking care of themselves in terms of eating, exercise, sleeping, all those things that help the mind and the emotions. A key one is helping the person to have a sense of self separate to, and I've put X because it could be a person, or it could be anything you feel you've lost, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. But when someone's entire identity is linked to the thing that they've lost, it's obviously a lot harder for them to feel like there's any life beyond. All they can see is what they haven't got. Continuity, as in when I talked about the river, that there's something larger than self. And a key thing is the disengagement from unattainable goals. So as coaching is a lot of the time focused on setting goals and motivating people to achieve them, in this case, it's more important that someone is able to disengage from goals that they had, dreams and goals that now are no longer going to be possible. It's a really big thing. So helping someone to cope with the fact that they aren't going to achieve those now, before they can ever think about new goals to start again. So in terms of a lot of coaching and hypnotherapy, NLP and CBT, and a lot of that kind of work, brief therapy work. It's different from counselling in terms of the solution focus. So it's often seen to be more forward looking. It doesn't dwell on the past. It sort of moves people on to looking at what they can do about things in the present and the future, and is often very positive and action based. So you can kind of see where it could be useful, but it needs to be treated with a little bit of kid gloves in terms of this particular topic. There's a lot more listening needed, particularly at the beginning. The main thing somebody needs to do is to be able to talk about what they've lost. And it's really important that person gets to express as much as possible and explore the loss and how they're feeling about it and the reality. Often, if people have moved on before that, as I said before, it's easy to get stuck because those feelings never come out. They stay with the person. I've been known to have like whole, particularly the first sessions when it's early on in a bereavement or something, the whole session is the person telling me about that person and their relationship with them, memories and how they're feeling. And why that's really important is to build up. If they're relaxed enough, they might even be able to talk about some quite uncomfortable feelings that might come up. Not all the time, but sometimes people are a bit conflicted. So, for example, they might have the last words to the person that they've lost might have been an argument, and they feel upset or guilty about that, or they might not. I had one lady who, she was there at the bedside of her husband all the time. The one time she went out to get a cup of tea, that's when he died, and she couldn't seem to forgive herself that she wasn't there when he actually died. So there's these kind of feelings that sometimes people can't really talk about with their family, or they don't want to upset them, and it's important that there's someone there objective who is able to listen in a non-judgmental way and hear those things and help the person work through those feelings. Obviously, there isn't a happy end solution a lot of the time in terms of being able to solve a problem. So it's solution focused in a slightly different way, helping the person progress and find a new path is really what it's about. And asking people to dream big and set goals too early on is just not going to work, obviously. So these are some of the skills and techniques. Then if those things are important, then there's a whole heap of ways we can help people. I mean, actually actively listening is something. I had one lad say to me that his family were really bored of him going on and on about his friend, and he was getting comments like, surely you should be over it by now, I don't want to hear all that again, stop going on about it. And but just being able to have somebody there fresh who he could talk to, was really good, and actively listen rather than shut him down, because people get uncomfortable hearing about loss, and they do tend to shut people down and not let them express their feelings. It's more to do with their own discomfort than thinking about the person often. So if nothing else, active listening is a massive thing. And in a lot of training, I mean, I remember being told in my hypnotherapy training, don't let the client go on and take control of the session, because you won't have helped them problem solve or resolve anything. But in this case, if it's reasonably early on in a loss or bereavement, the main thing you can do is be a proper ear for that person and let them talk and express and cry even. So that, and the non-judgmental, safe, confidential space. Sometimes there's difficult situations that people haven't been able to tell anyone. So maybe there's a secret that it's stopping them grieve, because maybe in public they weren't supposed to know the person, or there was a difficult relationship. So you're that person that they can be honest and true with. The client-centered approach, which most of us use, is key, because there isn't one way for someone to be or react, and you can reinforce that, and just telling the person it's normal, however you want to do this is the right way to do it, is a really refreshing thing for them to hear. Often you can use your techniques to start to address distorted cognitions. We'll do an exercise where we'll look at distorted cognitions in a bit, but it's mostly things that have been set in someone that keeps them stuck, and you can help them reframe their thinking. But that can only be done slightly later on in the process. Helping the person remember their resilience. How have they coped with loss before? Most people have. It's good to remind them that they've been through other things and survived, but also their identity outside of this. So particularly talking about the sports people and performers that I worked with, a lot of them, their whole identity was based around being able to run fast. And if they could no longer do that, they couldn't see what else they could do, who they were, because if they couldn't run, they were nothing, basically. So having to help someone find or remember that they are more than the thing that they've lost, and that there are other parts of their personality that they can then use, is a really good thing. There's anticipated loss, which is, mostly if someone has been given a terminal diagnosis, or if you've received an injury and it means that you can't carry on your career anymore, things that are going to happen. Or even in my management consultancy, when I worked with some businesses to help them wind up their business, this is another way that loss sometimes needs to be addressed, because if someone knows in advance, then you can help them plan for succession or wind up or moving on. It can make the process a lot better for them than pretending it's not going to happen and then waiting till it's been forced on them. And then once disengaged from unattainable goals, you can help people to create new, adventurous, exciting, attainable ones. There is a new life that people can live, and they will always carry that loss and grief with them, but it doesn't mean to say they can't continue to do new things. So some of the things that you can practically do: talk about the object or person of their loss, and talk about the good and the bad. Go through memories, photographs, ask people to bring photographs, memorabilia, objects that they can talk about, remembering what they've had with that person, or what they've gained from the career or business or relationship, is a really important thing to carry forwards. And sometimes bad as well. You can pick up if a client only mentions they're a saint or they're a sinner sort of thing. You can help them start to be a bit more realistic about that experience, and some humor sometimes. I mean, sometimes I've ended up having a good laugh with people when they've been recounting memories of times that they had with their partners or family. It's not something that you have to shy away from. You can bring humor in, obviously, if it's led by the client. And a really, really nice thing to do with people is to create a memory box or a memory board or something of that sort. One of the really lovely exercises we used to do with people, we had coloured sand or glitter, and we asked people to think of a memory or a particular quality of that person, select a colour that most represented it, and then put it in a little glass vial, and then think of another memory or quality of the person that's another colour, and just gradually build up a little vial of lead colours of sand or glitter, and that's kept somewhere that is the person can see, and it just keeps reminding you of the things that you want to keep about that person that you hold within you, that no one can really take away, the experiences, the qualities and the things that you had with that person. Nowadays there's a lot of digital stuff, so I've had people who had a digital board, or someone else I know whose husband died, they've still got his Facebook account, and they post to him on his birthday and Christmas, and post pictures of his kids and stuff to try and to keep that memory there and to be able to keep that connection. And what they enjoy is that other people also post their memories of the person as well, and they actually quite like that. Work through about triggers or significant dates, because the wave of grief thing is unexpected, but if you can help plan for what you can, obviously birthdays sometimes difficult, or anniversary of death, or various dates will have a significance, and if you can plan some way of marking that day in advance so it doesn't blindside, and think about, I call it a ritual, but something that you can do that just marks that day for you and helps you keep expressing that emotion and connection. And then journaling is always really useful if someone likes writing, to keep a journal or to express, keep talking about their emotions and what their thoughts are, and sometimes even writing to the person. The other one is sort of taken from hypnotherapy, where you can ask the person to ask the client to visualize the person, create a representative for the feelings that they generate, and then imagine creating that feeling into something that they can wear or keep on or inside them. So I've had one client make a really warm orange fluffy ball, and in her mind she made it into a ring and put it on her finger, so that she can always carry that feeling of love with her wherever she goes. Other people, someone else had a parrot that sits on their shoulder, so they can talk to the person whenever they want to. And there was a slight humorous element to that, because often the parrot would interrupt them and say some of the things that they remember their partner used to say to them. It's slightly paradoxical that people need to remember the person in order to be able to move forward. I mean, I say move on, it's not really moving on it, but it's moving down a different path. Often people can only do that if they can take that person with them in a way. Just a quick one around guilt and shame, because that's the thing that often sticks people on the rocks or on the washed up beach or stuck in the whirlpool. So these are some of the things that you can do. The first one may sound a little bit woo-woo to some, but it really works. And if the person's willing to do it. So you ask them to reflect on what's weighing heavily on them, and then write I and their name. Choose to actively participate in my own freedom. I choose to forgive myself for, and then put what it was that they feel guilty about or feel like they've made a mistake in, and then to read it out. And if they can read it out whenever they start to feel that feeling of guilt come over them, it's, yeah, I don't know how it works, but it does. It's like an affirmation, but it does help people start to have a bit of self-compassion and forgive themselves for whatever they feel like they've done. You can point out that guilt implies intention to harm, and ask the client if realistically they have ever intended harm, which usually they haven't. So you can then say, well, can you reframe the word then? Maybe there are things you wish you could have been done better or different or more. The client can then write a letter to the person about what they would have wished they could have done or said. And then after writing the letter, you ask them to do something that they can choose what they do with it. But in a way, it has to go into the air or the sea or somewhere you can burn it. And it almost like cleanses in a way. And then a very great exercise that I use a lot for a lot of things, the empty chair exercise from Gestalt. If you're confident doing that, you can use this technique. Have your client have a conversation with the person. So have two chairs and have them speak to the person and tell them that the things that they would have liked to have said. Sometimes it's just that someone was taken before and left sort of unfinished business, or they would have liked to have said things, but they weren't given the opportunity. So it gives the person that opportunity to express what they miss having expressed. Okay, so I would like to take you through an exercise now very quickly. I don't know if you've got a pen and paper handy or anything. If you have, if you could draw a house for me. It needs to have 4 floors, a roof, a chimney, a door and a flag. A door and a flag. On the ground floor of the house, just have a think of and write the values that sort of govern your life. Values being things like, what's really deeply important to you. Okay, and on the walls of the house, write the people or things that support you. And on the roof, the things or people that protect you. And coming out of the chimney, ways that you blow off steam. And then we're moving to the flag. And on the flag, write what you would really like people to know about you. Just one thing. If people only knew one thing about you, what would you want them to know? On the door, another difficult one. What are the things that you keep hidden from others? Okay, so just got the floors to finish now. So on the first floor, write, if you can think of a loss or that you can bring to mind, write 3 words that describe your grief journey or your loss. And on the second floor, things that have helped you in that loss and grief. Going up to the 3rd floor, anything positive that may come from your grief journey. Depending on how far away in time you are from your grief or loss, this will be easier or more difficult. So something positive or something you learned. And the final one, on the top floor, write a declaration of hope for your future. Yeah, I mean, the idea would be you do take time to do it because people need, but also people can think too much. Sometimes the thing that comes to mind first is the most important thing, in terms of what do you think, what would you like people to know about you is one of those things where people can censor that a little bit. It's like, oh, I can't say that, but it's come to your head, so put it down. But it can be really rich material to use to talk through stuff with clients, that and the sort of whirlpool of grief, and but it's a useful thing to help start to move to talk about supporting the person to find their new life, basically. I've also got a few resources that you can, links to. There's some fab websites that have got loads and loads of creative exercises that you can, and tools you can use with people. So I'll share that as well. In terms of helping people who are I call them high performance oriented people, tend to be like executives often, or athletes, or someone who's basically subscribed to some of these beliefs. You're only as good as your last win, no pain, no gain, very goal oriented, and measuring themselves by how good they are at the thing they do, competencies and that kind of motivation, fairly externally motivated in some ways. They really need help to redefine themselves. A lot of work is needed to help them understand that that's not all they are, to expand their understanding of who they are beyond whatever it was they did. And the way that you can do that is start with the core values. Like, what are their core values? So say they're a footballer, but their core values are adventure and creativity and capability or teamwork. Then you can start to take those elements and use them to expand into their life, not just their sport. So not them as a sports person, but how do you show those values and live those values in your family or with friends, or what other jobs, careers might you engage with that fit those values. Get them to talk about what they really liked about what they did, their business or their sport. And then you can start to pull out, well, if you really enjoyed camaraderie of being in a team, what other things will give you that, and also what they didn't like. And that's a really good one, because often people are completely fixated on what they can't do anymore, and that it was all wonderful. But if you get them to if you ask them, well, there must have been times when you didn't enjoy it, or things that you didn't like, and oh yeah, I didn't like having to train 24 hours a day, never seeing my family, not being there for birthdays and things. Then you can start to work on, well, that opens up possibilities for you to do some of those things now, and get a little bit more hope and balance into their thinking. Listen out for their limiting beliefs, because we're bombarded by these, and particularly in business and in sports and often life generally. There's loads of these platitudes. They're really good as motivational quotes for certain things, but if they get internalized as truths and they're so generalized, they can be destructive. So challenge those. So if someone believes that you're only as good as your last win, but they can't compete anymore, what does that say about them? That they're rubbish, basically, and it can't be true. So you can start to challenge those cognitive distortions and negative self-talk. And it has been found that the more someone's performance oriented and high achieving, the more likely they are to struggle with loss, actually, because it's difficult to let go of that really strong goal focus to the sacrifice of their own, sometimes health, family, and everything else. So these are some cognitive distortions which some of you will be familiar with, coaches and hypnotherapists. So you can literally take them through this table. What type of distortion do you think you have? Say, let's just pick the last one, jumping to conclusions, mind reading. What is this? Making assumptions about what's going to happen. We call it fortune telling, or about what other people are thinking, mind reading. How does this show? My son hasn't rung, he doesn't need me anymore now he's at university, and the motorbike club only tolerated me because I went with him. I can't go on my own. I'm going to end up alone and stuck at home. So you can see how the negative spiral goes. This is an empty nester one. So what might be credible alternative explanations? Where is the evidence that if your son hasn't rung, he doesn't need you anymore. What alternative truths could there be? And you can get the client to literally think of, flip it and think of an alternative, so that they start to realize, or they start to come out of their absolutist thinking. But these are all important things for people who are dealing with loss. So think of a loss that you have and write the name of the loss, name it. Then write 3 words to describe what is lost. And then just take a minute to look at those words and sort of honor them and feel glad that you did have them and you still have those. And now if you can think about what skills or life lessons did that period in your life give you that you are pulling forwards into the future? Any learning or any skills or life lessons? Next question. Because of that experience, how is your life different now? Next question. So imagine that's your stepping stone then. Given that you and your life is changed, what do you want in your life now? Obviously, you would spend more time with the client, but it's just a way of gradually enabling people to extract learning and the good stuff that they've gained and take it forwards and start to look forwards a little bit. And you would follow that up by giving them homework. And I normally ask them to write a letter to their past self, thanking them for everything that they've given, but also explaining what you now have as a result and what they can look forward to. So I know it's a bit confusing, but if you understand what I'm saying. So you're writing to your past self, thanking them for what they've given you now, but also telling them of what you have as a result and what they can look forward to. It's really useful for things like people who, I don't know, losses to do with being single or going through menopause, certain different losses like that. It's a good thing to sort of recognize that whatever you had then has got resources that you can use to be resilient now, and it has got you where you are now, but now you have things that you can move forward with. And again, it's starting to help the person imagine that there is life beyond. So it's another way of helping. Once they've written the letter to their past self, it's another one that you burn or wash the letter away. So you're metaphorically letting go of that chapter after thanking the chapter for what it's given you, and you're carrying it forward in yourself to your next chapter. And as a result of that experience, you can now be better, do different, or you're a different person having been changed by that experience. There's just so many. I mean, I would just flag up that when you work with people, just bear in mind your own attitude to death and loss. If you have any qualms about it, it will come across to your client, and they won't feel comfortable talking to you. And what you really need is to have a comfortable space that someone can actually say anything they need to say to you. The other thing is your use of words, and sometimes it can feel really harsh, but when someone's died, to actually use the word death or died to help the person know that it's okay to talk about it, and that you're not going to get phased by someone. I've had someone who burst into tears from the moment I met her, and for the whole hour was crying, and we didn't really do anything or talk about anything, but she just really needed to do that, and to know that someone wasn't going to feel uncomfortable or try and shut her down, because what often happens is you try and stop people crying, but it's really important that people can express how they want to express. So thank you very much for sticking it through. I've just put a couple of things that I've found useful. So there's a book called Grief Works, Stories of Life, Death and Survival. There's some academic studies about chronic health and working with sports people and athletes. And then the only other thing I would say is always have some organisations that you can refer a client to, because sometimes it's beyond know your limits. Basically, if they're having suicidal ideations or are stuck in a complex grief situation where they've had so many different experiences of loss and grief that it's compacted, then they probably need someone who's got expertise in that area. Might be you, I don't know. But if it's not, and even if it is, it's useful for them to join groups to create their social network outside of just you, so they're not dependent on you and they can get extra help. So there's just a few organisations there. Good luck everyone with helping people, because you can really do a lot to help.